You know, I don't like it when governments step in on major sensitive national issues which should be dealt with by the courts first. You look at what happened with the payout to alleged rape victim Brittany Higgins. Secretly, the Attorney-General signed off on Higgins receiving almost $2.5 million because of her allegations. It was money for her loss of earning capacity, legal costs, medical expenses, domestic assistance, and $400,000 for hurt, distress and humiliation. But as we discovered in the subsequent criminal and civil court cases, Higgins had made false representations to the government in that compensation settlement. Which brings us to today, and the same government, this time the Defence Minister Richard Marles, strips Distinguished Service Medals from commanding officers who held senior roles during the war in Afghanistan.
He has provided the nation with the opportunity to do all that we can to make right a terrible wrong. Australia owes him and his team a debt of gratitude. These were findings of the most serious, disturbing and consequential nature. They warranted the most serious, considered and thorough response.
Now, this has been done because it's the remaining recommendation of the Brereton inquiry into alleged war crimes by Australian soldiers. Underline the word alleged. And the opposition has taken a bipartisan approach. Andrew Hastie was quite emotional in his support for the move today.
To ask questions. From Tarankot to Kabul, to Kandahar, to Dubai, to Canberra. Excuse me. Those in the chain of command should have asked more questions. Some may well have done that. But an earlier intervention by our political and strategic leadership may have avoided much of the pain that people have experienced in Afghanistan and through this lengthy process. Leadership matters is my point.
Now, this is all very bipartisan, but I've got great misgivings about this going ahead today. There's one sole charge laid out of the Brereton inquiry, one only. That's Oliver Schultz, the former SAS soldier, who's been charged with a battlefield murder. Not one conviction yet, if there ever will be. And yet in comes the government to take away what the Defence Force has already proudly handed out. The Distinguished Service Medal was introduced in 1991 and is awarded for exceptional leadership in warlike operations and entitles recipients to a nickel-silver medal with their details engraved upon it. The RSL has maintained that no action should be taken against commanders until the court process was complete. And to add further insult to injury, this has all been done just days after the release of the final Royal Commission report into veteran suicide. And I know for certain that veterans and their advocates are furious over this, and yet the government says it's very concerned about the mental health of Australian veterans. Really? I think you can mount a convincing argument that these officers are being unfairly punished for the alleged wrongdoing of others. And I always remember what the recently retired Chief of Defence Angus Campbell said when the Brereton report dropped. It wasn't just individual soldiers who should take responsibility, he said.
Not correcting this culture as it developed was a failure of unit and higher command.
Now, doesn't that apply to him? The Chief of Defence is the highest command. And Campbell himself served as commander of the Joint Task Force 633 in 2011 and 2012. He was deployed to Afghanistan, although the reality, according to some veterans, was that he led this mission in comfort from Dubai. But he was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross for that service. Why isn't his being taken off him as well? My argument has always been, if he knew about the alleged wrongdoing in Afghanistan, he deserves to be punished. If he didn't, he was out of touch and incompetent. And what is irritating veterans even more is the secrecy surrounding today's decision. The government has declined to identify the names of the officers who've been stripped of their medals and specifically why they had to be stripped of their medals. It's been reported that up to 9 people have had their awards cancelled. 9 senior commanding officers, some of whom have already been recognised for their distinguished service. Now, the Brereton report was largely based on the evidence of Afghan civilians who many veterans have maintained were Taliban operatives, if not fighters. Now, I have never fought in war where the enemy didn't operate under the official rules of engagement. I have never had to watch my mates killed by civilians who turned out to be members of the Taliban. I have never carried my injured mates to safety or carried their dead bodies back to base. Most of the officers who were stripped of their medals today have, though. As a result, I find the stripping of their medals beyond the pale.